Hi, Ted. How are you?
Hi, Katie. I'm fine. Where are you?
I'm in Los Angeles.
Aha. Why did I thought you were up in San Francisco, Stanford. You're not?
Yes, I am starting this fall, but we're all online.
Good.
Yes, between the COVID and the fires, they're not having students return to campus.
Right. I'm up in Vancouver. My wife Mary's about to start a TV show up here, and we're in quarantine. And we are looking at literally overcast skies from the fires from Washington State. It's just
Mhm.
just amazing.
Yeah, here too, it's like the sun is bright red because of all of the smoke and the fire. So it's quite surreal, really.
Yeah. Well, this is like a blind date. I'm slightly embarrassed, but I can't wait to find out more about what you're doing and share what I'm doing. And so, you want to start first?
Great. Yeah, I can go ahead and then I'll pass it over to you. So I'm Katie. I use she, her pronouns. I'm 20. I am from Wisconsin originally, born and raised, but I've been living in LA for the last 2 years. I'm taking time off school before starting, which is happening next week. So very exciting, all online, but a bit anticlimactic, but here we are. And I am the executive director of an organization called Future Coalition, which is a network of youth led organizations and youth organizers across the country. So essentially, what we do is we act as a connective tissue between young people who are making change in their communities and then work to provide them resources that traditionally have only been available to adult organizing. We formed actually initially after the rise of youth activism we saw in 2018 around gun violence prevention after the shooting in Parkland, Florida, but have since gone on to work on a number of issues, climate being our largest. We coordinate the Climate Strike Coalition, which is the coalition of over 500 organizations that all collaborate together to plan the climate strikes here in the US when we were able to mobilize the strikes on the streets, and then now as we're doing digital actions and other small actions. So I've been involved with sort of this new wave of the youth climate movement for the last year and a half or so. Right now, everything we're doing is pointed at the election, working to mobilize the youth vote to turn out for the November 3rd election. And then we're getting prepared to hopefully post election be holding those in office accountable to start acting on climate change.
Wow. Well done. Well, can I just ask before I start? Um, what was day one of your, oh, I'm going to do something. I need to help change the world, make things better. How did you get from not that to that?
Yeah, so the very first like introduction I had to organizing or activism or anything like that was when I was in fourth grade. And I was in a gym class where our teacher would make the boys and the girls play separately. And I always thought the boys had more fun. And so I convinced my whole class to stage a sit in. So we all walked into gym class, sat down on the floor, and refused to get up unless our gym teacher would let us all play together. And it worked. And so without knowing any of, organizing or anything like that, that was sort of my first introduction into, okay, one person can inspire a collective to make a change. And that sort of, yeah, lit my spark. And then I got involved with climate change and climate activism when I was in sixth grade.
Wow.
Yeah, I've sort of been working on it ever since.
Well done. Well done. I'm Ted. I'm an actor. I'm an ocean activist. I have been for the last 35 years. Grew up in Arizona. My father was an archaeologist and an anthropologist, and then a director of a museum. So it was a small museum, but lots of scientists from all over the world would come because it was in Flagstaff, Arizona. And I was surrounded by scientists, but I just played and fantasized and had fun with my friends. But I think I picked up a sense of, there's a lot that's come before us and there's a lot that will come after us. And this time is not just about you, it's about your stewardship of what you've been given. And I think that sunk in, but really I didn't pay much attention to the important stuff in life until probably in the mid 80s. I was in the middle of doing Cheers. I was getting paid a lot of money. I was feeling guilty about not having a purpose and making use of that money. And I also moved into a neighborhood that was fighting Occidental Petroleum from slant drilling 60 wells into the bay. And my friend Robert Sulnick, who was an environmental lawyer, and I figured out, along with others, how to beat them, and we did. And we naively started something called American Oceans Campaign because we liked the conversation. And we did that for about 15 years. And then in 2001, we merged with Oceana, which is the world's largest ocean activist group that focuses just on oceans. So here I am. I think really, if I dug deep, it was probably partly me trying to say to my father, hey, I know I'm an actor, but I'm also hanging around with scientists, I'm kind of like you. So that's my platform, Oceana. And it allows me to talk about pretty much everything that's going on in the world right now.
That's so great. That's so amazing. And it's so commendable that you're using your platform in a good way. I think if more people did that, we would hopefully be in a different place. So yeah, so great.
I've always been the guy, just to be clear, I am not an expert. I am the actor who happens to be on the board of directors of Oceana. And I've always, from day one, realized that my job was to say, thank you for watching Cheers or 3 Men and a Baby or whatever, and let me introduce you to this amazing marine biologist. She has something really important to say. So I've always been outside the tent going, come in, there's some important stuff going on. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a very key role, right? We need to get sort of, in order to make the kind of change we need in the time we need it, we need to get sort of the everyday person involved. And in order to do that, we have to reach them in ways that I think are often not sort of the inner circle or the inner bubble of people that would already be involved. And so I think that takes kind of everyday people with sort of platforms to be the ones to speak up and say, you got to get involved, you got to be part of this collective.
Yes, I firmly believe that and there are people out there who do not believe in climate change or science, that it is our job, instead of going, what's wrong with them? It's our job to figure out why we're communicating poorly. What can we do better? Maybe it's our attitude. Maybe we're playing holier than thou and aren't we smart and you're not. Whatever it is, it is, to my brain, the science is so clear that then your job, our job is to communicate it in such a way that it becomes obvious,
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think with climate change also, it's, for many people, it's such an abstract issue that it's so hard to, how we communicate it adds that extra layer of challenge, because it's not something that, you previously may have seen right before your eyes. And I think that, there are a lot of people pouring a lot of money into messaging it that, well, if you can't see it, then it's not real. Right. And so I think that, as communicators of climate science, to whatever degree that is, I think, we're in a year this year where it's never been easier to say, this is concrete, whether it's look outside, the sky is orange, or what we're seeing with COVID-19, right? It's giving people something concrete to look at and say, this is what an existential crisis looks like. And this is what happens when, this is what it looks like when we can't handle an existential problem like we're supposed to and we're not prepared for. And, one can only hope that we use this as a wake-up call. And when we start to rebuild, we say, okay, we need to rebuild in a way where our society and our systems are going to be structurally sound enough to be able to respond to other existential threats that inevitably we'll see in the coming years.
Yes, absolutely. I think COVID, horrible, frightening, scary, sad. But if you were to look for a silver lining, I hope that it teaches us that science is science. I can't remember who said rocks are hard, water's wet, period. You can have a political point of view. You can be overwhelmed and want to duck. You can do all those human things, but it's just a fact. COVID, you cannot politicize, a virus. You cannot make it, good guys, bad guys. It is just science. And that's the same with climate change. And hopefully we will see that. Well, no, it is the truth. If you let science lead the way, there are many things that we can do to make it better. And we are still in a timely fashion. It may not go back to what it was like, 100 years ago or 50 years ago, but we can stop it from becoming a total disaster. And if you're hearing otherwise, like you said, that is a finely crafted message from people like oil companies or petrochemical companies that have a horse in the race that they don't want to give up.
Most definitely, yes. I mean, I think that it's such a misconception that we don't have the solutions. There was this documentary that came out earlier in the year, right after Earth Day, that was talking about solar power, and the footage they were using was from 10 years ago. Over the last 10 years, we've seen huge strides in solar energy and wind energy, in their efficiency and their cost efficiency. And so I think that we know that the solutions are out there. That's not the problem, right? The problem isn't that there's not a pathway to saving life as we know it on this planet. It's rather we don't have the will. We don't have the collective saying this is something we must do. We saw with COVID-19, entire countries shut down in a matter of days. Entire economies were turned upside down. So we can do it if we have the will to do it, to make huge changes essentially overnight. We just have to collectively decide that's what we're going to do. Our leadership needs to decide that's what we're going to do. And I think that takes every facet of society, right? It's not about an individual. It's about the media reporting on it in the way that it should be. It's about, schools teaching it in the way that they should be. It's about elected officials talking about it as the existential crisis that it is, instead of just sort of talking about it as, oh yes, this is some problem that eventually will affect us down the line.
Right. And how you talk about it. I mean, there's so many reasons why you should, in my case, I'll talk about oceans, why you should care about the oceans, why you should care about the critters in the oceans, why you should care that plastic is doing which we're going to talk about, all these horrible things to, seabirds and mammals and fish that ingest it, But if you want to get people's attention, sometimes I've discovered talking about fish, I can put people to sleep in about 5 minutes. But if I talk about world hunger, and the fact that if you harvest oceans correctly, if you have fisheries managed in such a way that they are performing in a peak, but also responsible, sustainable way, you could provide 1 billion fish meals a day. If you could quantify, caught fish that way, 1 billion fish meals a day. So that all of a sudden is a different conversation than just fish. You're talking about world hunger. You're talking about it being a perfect protein. You don't have to you don't have to use fresh water. You don't have to cut down a tree to plant something, to grow something, to feed a pig. It is a perfect protein. And you're not cutting down rainforests, so you are doing something for climate change. And you're creating more jobs. So if you start talking about things so people can hear them, I don't care about fish. Who cares? I live in the middle of the country. I do care about perhaps feeding the world. I do care about climate change, and I do care about jobs. Do the right thing environmentally, and most of the time you will create more jobs, more money, and feed more people in a healthy way.
Most definitely. I mean, I think that is a huge transition we're seeing in, not just the climate movement over the last few years, but I think as a society as a whole is understanding that, whatever issue you're talking about, it's linked to a whole other host of issues. When we talk about climate change, I think for so long it was messaged as the polar bears and the ice caps melting. And again, it was such an abstract idea, when in reality, this is a people's issue. It's about people. And you can't talk about climate change or climate justice without talking about racial justice, right? Without talking about immigration, without talking about hunger. All of these issues are so linked. And so, when we're talking about the climate crisis and we're talking about addressing and dealing with the climate crisis, we have to talk about the people. We have to talk about the effects on Indigenous people and Indigenous sovereignty, on Black and Brown communities. All of these things are intersectional. They're linked. And so by addressing one, we will have to address all of the others.
Yes, and that's the good news. That is the good news. It will not be back to life as we knew it with all the, stuff that was scooted under the carpet. We cannot go back to it. And it's not, there may be people who want to try to go back to it, but literally COVID, climate change is not going to let that happen.
Definitely. And I think the other thing that, I think is gives me hope at least is that young people, who have now sort of taken over as driving this movement over the last few years, just inherently understand how all of these things are connected, and inherently understand that in order to address the climate crisis, we have to address, the deep racial injustice in this country, as well as
Right.
a whole host of issues. And so I think that, there is still hope. We have time still to do something. And again, it's just going to take individuals deciding to come together as a collective to demand that that change is made. And when young people lead the way, when Indigenous people lead the way, when Black and brown people lead the way, that is the path toward recovering our climate and recovering our society from inevitable destruction.
Right. So, um, what do you need from me? I'm a nerd, or at least the son of a nerd who went off and became an actor. But so I so admire what you're doing, and it is on you. I mean, I will, at some point pass away, probably not when the full effects of climate change have really landed on us all. So I can be sad, I can be this, I can be that, but you will be living with it. I mean, in a very real way, like we are on the West Coast right now, and probably even more so. So what do you need from people my age? Is that a stupid question or?
No, I don't think it's a stupid question at all. I think that there's a lot of people right now, whether it's about, talking about movement for Black lives to get involved, whether it's talking about how to help with the climate crisis, there are individuals saying, how do I get involved? And I think, when talking about climate in particular, I think that there has been this narrative and this rhetoric over the last few years that, to be part of the change, you have to not fly as much or recycle or, live green and sustainably. And while those things are very key in the cultural change, the truth is it's not up to an individual or a couple individuals to make this change. We've
No.
seen that with COVID. People weren't able to fly, and it made a really minimal difference in, our overall carbon emissions. And so when we're talking about what an individual can do, I believe that the key thing as individuals we can do is join in the collective, because an individual cannot make this change alone, but a collective
Right.
can come together to demand it. And that's what we need. We need
Right.
a lot of people to share one voice in making that demand. And so
Right.
in whatever way you can, I think, the reason we take to the streets, we use our bodies so that we physically show disruption, disrupting the status quo, disrupting the normal. So what other ways as an individual can you disrupt in that way, right? It's, if you can get out in the streets, get out in the streets. If you can vote, vote. If you can write a letter to your representatives, if you can have the hard conversations with your friends and family, if you can, post
Right.
on social media as a start. But it's these things that it's not about just what you can do as an individual. Don't
Right.
take that responsibility on, but rather see that you can be part of something larger, a larger purpose, a larger solution. And that's joining in the collective call for change.
Yes, I agree entirely. I've always been, for whatever reason, well, let me talk about Oceania for a minute. What we do is at a national level in 9, 10 countries around the world, and the European Union, we work with governments to change policy. We use every tool we can to make that happen, but we change policy to make sure that there are more fish in the ocean so that more people can eat them, basically. And then you have to do all these other things. But it's about changing policy. And I'm gonna, well, it's clear that I'm 72 and I just told you. So this is maybe one of those things that are horrible things to say, but there's a fear that the people who are on the streets will not transist from disrupting to being in the system enough to change the policy by voting and then by being part of whatever system creates the policy. Shoot that down, because I know it's not true, but some people in the news talk about, will the youth vote show up?
Yes, and that's very interesting that you say that because it is actually a narrative that we are actively trying to fight against. I know that we're running out of time, so I'll keep it very short. But just to say is that, the reason that there is this narrative about young people not voting, it's not coming from youth. The young people, the leaders in the streets, they're not saying don't go and vote. This is psychological voter suppression. That's what we call it, because there are forces at will that want us to not vote. And so they perpetuate this message that we won't vote so that you'll believe it and that other young people will believe it, and then we won't go and do it. And so the message and the narrative that we have to be leaning into and we have to be promoting in every space and with every young person and adult that we're talking to about is that voting is not the magic silver bullet. This election is not going to fix everything by any means,
No,
but it is a
big stuff.
necessary step on the
Yeah,
path to the revolution that we ultimately want to see.
yeah.
Voting and disrupting on the streets, those two things go hand in hand. We cannot have one without the other. And I think that that is more true in reality than the narrative that the media perpetuates. And it's our job to say, we'll take to the streets and we'll vote. We protest, we organize, we vote,
Yeah.
repeat. That's the motto. That's the narrative. It is about voting in rebellion. It's about saying to the establishment, saying to the people that don't want us to vote, you are wrong. We are going to vote. We're going to show you that we will show up. You will transfer that power, and then we'll be right back out in the streets holding you accountable because we put you there.
Okay. So I'm having fun. I hope you're okay that I'm asking you these direct questions. So there are people who have that their status quo is actually quite comfortable, and they're nice people, and they care, and they sympathize, and some of them even are out, doing all the right things, but they don't want to lose their safety, their health, their not their health, their money. Let's call it what it is. So you say revolution, and then people get, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to give up literally everything to make this fighting climate change work because it has to be a revolution, to which you say,
Yes. Yes, everyone is going to have to give something up. Everyone is going to have to be
yeah,
uncomfortable. That's just the sad truth. And it can be now, it can be small things, it can be things that won't change your life that drastically, or it can be 10 years when your house is burning down and your neighbor's house is burning down and everyone's forced to move inland and nobody has
right.
water or food and 1 billion people are displaced from their homes. So it can be now or it can be later. But the truth is we're going to have to make sacrifices. And that's just something that we all have to come to terms through, because where we are right now, it will take a revolution to come back from. But it's a revolution that if we all do in the right way, we won't maybe notice it as much as if we wait any more
Right,
time.
because we're not talking about taking away, we're talking about creating more jobs. But, and there is money to be made and businesses to support that will actually do the right thing, whether it's clean energy, whether it's, banking that puts money into the neighborhoods that have, historically not had the money to do what they need to do to be healthy and survive and all of that. So, I mean, to my ear, or am I just doing the old guy thing? To my ear, revolution does not necessarily mean, it means, yes, you're going to have to make big changes and there will be some sacrifice. But it to me sounds like a good thing to my ears. It sounds like, we're making way more money and have way more jobs in California doing clean energy than any of the parts of the world that are doing just oil. That to me is a positive thing. I'm trying to find a way to be, yes, sacrifice, yes, revolution, but doable and join it because there is something really positive and good and joyful about it. Because my fear is not you, but if people get overwhelmed, which is also something the oil companies want you to be, but if people get overwhelmed, they will drop out. It'll be too much, too uncomfortable. So you need to find a joyful way to be, like you have, obviously, to be, leading this revolution. I rambled. Your turn.
No, I think that's great. I know we're being told that we're running out of time here, so I'll say this and then maybe we can close out. But I think that, it comes down to the fact that I think people are really uncomfortable with change. So when I say the words revolution, young people hear, great, we get to change. There's going to be a change. We're going to see something better. And people that honestly maybe coming from other generations might say, well, everything is fine. Why do we need a change? And so I think as a society, and I think as a country, and our culture needs to shift to look at change not as a bad thing. Change doesn't mean they get some, which means I have to give up some, but it just means we can all have some together. And I think that's the key, is that, change is a good thing. Change means that we're progressing. It means that more people are coming into the circle. We're bringing more people to the table. We're going to start to see more diverse spaces that are more equitable. And I think that is a good thing to most people, for most people. And so I think that, we shouldn't look at it as a negative at all. I think it's about change for the better. As you said, it's about the creation of more jobs, different jobs, but more jobs. It's about the, more sustainable food, different types of food, but more food. And so I think that's, we have to look at it is change. And that's really scary, because change means we're, diving headfirst into the unknown, but for the better, change for the better. And I think that's the key. So I know we're coming to the end of time, but I really appreciated this conversation. I think it's been totally great. And, it's re-energized me, taken me away from my college orientation. But I have a lot of faith. I think that, there is hope. I think right now we all have to focus on the election, get registered, get voting, and then get ready to get in the streets when it's over, and hold our elected officials accountable.
Right. And I would just add that this is a time not to be cynical or fearful, or if it may be fearful, but, turn that into something positive and hopeful, because that's a good place to do this work. A lot of times when you come out of fear, things fall apart. So stay in that position. It's going to be really airy-fairy, but stay in that nurturing, loving place when you are leading this revolution. All of us, all of us. And I would add one more thing. I didn't talk that much about Oceana, but it's so science-driven that if you want to know anything about oceans, or anyone out there that does, and to use it as a resource, please do. Oceana, brilliant.
Great.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate talking to you.
Yeah, you as well.
Yeah, take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.